So far, we've only looked at payoff matrices as a way to represent problems in game theory. So payoff matrices are great, right? They are nice and neat and organized. You are able to see all the results all at the same time. They're pretty easy to understand and read once you get used to them. But they have a major weakness, and that weakness is that the only thing you can really represent in a payoff matrix is one decision made by each player. This player gets to choose, for this particular example, either to enter or stay out, and this player gets to choose either to accede or war. But most of the time, when we look at real life games that we're playing in game theory, it's usually a lot more complicated than that. Like, I decide to do something, and then based on my decision, you decide to do something, and then based on what you did, I decide to do something. And a payoff matrix is just not a great way to represent that. So that's where this lesson comes in, game trees. Okay, so matrices only allow each player to have one move, and they assume that players move at the same time and can't see each other's moves, which is not always the case. Okay, game trees allow people to make multiple decisions, and they let moves occur either one after each other, or they can occur all at the same time. We call them sequential games if one comes after the other, and they're much better represented in game trees. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to look at here. So let's look at this as first example. So we have these two firms that are looking to sell this particular product. So firm 2 has a monopoly on the market. So firm 2 has a monopoly. If firm 1 decides that they want to enter this market, then firm 2 has to decide to either accede to this new company or declare a price war. So they can either say, okay, we're just going to continue on as status quo and, let these other people also sell this product, or we declare a price war. We're going to go into like big campaigns to try to like really make sure that our product is the one that wins. We're going to drop our prices to try to make people buy our stuff more. So if they do that, they're not going to be making as much money. Their profits are going to go away. So both companies are really going to end up at zero. It's not going to go great for either of them. Okay, but if firm 2 decides, okay, that's all right, you can also be in this business, right? So the other guy can enter the market, then firm 2 is going to maintain the money that it would have invested into the price war, but they're not going to make as much profit because now they've got this other group that is coming in that's going to then take some of their money away. So let's look at kind of how this works out in our payoff or in our game tree down here. So you've got kind of this one dot that's always a little bit different than the other ones. In this case, it's an open dot versus a filled in one. You can kind of see like down on this one, right? There's two filled in ones. There's always just one that's the special one. And that just tells you where to start. The little numbers in the corner tell you which player is making the choice. So this little one here is telling you that this first choice is for player 1. They have to choose whether they want to stay out of the market or if they want to enter the market. Okay. If they choose to enter the market, then player 2 is going to make a choice. And player 2 has to decide if they want to accede or if they want to go to war. Okay. If player 1 decides to stay out of the market, then this is the only outcome. So this is the same way that we've been writing them the whole time. This is saying that player 1 would get an outcome of 2 and player 2 would get an outcome of 2. Okay, if they choose to enter and then as a result firm 2 decides to accede, then firm 1 is going to end up with 3 and firm 2 is going to end up with 1. Okay, so this is kind of how this table breaks down here. So the nice thing about this is that we can look at this and we can actually use it to map to a payoff matrix, right? So when we say, okay, this group is going to enter, and then if they enter and accede, then this would be our outcome of 3-1. Okay, if they choose to enter and they choose war, then enter war, that would be our outcome here. And in this case, staying out, no matter what, it doesn't matter. There's no choice to accede or war if they choose to stay out. So these would both have the same payoff. Okay, so we can easily map game trees to these payoff matrices. It works out very nicely. Okay, here's our matching pennies game again, right? So we have these two players. They either choose heads or tails. If the coins match, then player 2 gives player 1 $1, aka player 1 wins. Otherwise, player 1 gives player 2 $1, aka player 2 wins. So this is a game where you make simultaneous moves. So in this game, these ones are sequential, right? This guy makes a choice, and then once we know what they're choosing, then the next guy makes a choice. Whereas on this one, they're both making their move at the same time. So that's what this little dashed line is here, is it's saying that, okay, we've got player 1 makes their choice, player 2 makes their choice, but the little dashed line is to indicate that player 1 doesn't know what player 2 is doing and vice versa. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So if we wanted to map this one again, right? So player 1 has the first choice. So if player 1 chooses heads, and then player 2 has the next choice, right? This node has the 2 by it, so this is player 2's choice. They're also choosing heads. So that one's pretty easy to fit into our table. It really doesn't matter which one was first and which one was second. Okay, this guy down here, player 1 has chosen heads, and now player 2 is choosing tails. So remember, this is player 1, and this is player 2. So you got to be careful about which one of these cells this is going to go in. Player 1 is choosing heads, so player 1's choosing heads. Player 2 is choosing tails, so this one's going to go here. Okay, if player 1 chooses tails, right, so player 1 chooses tails, player 2 chooses heads, there's our outcome. And then down here, tails, then tails would give us this guy right here. Okay, so that's just another way of representing a payoff matrix, right? So you can take this payoff matrix and you can make it look this way, or you can make it look this way, okay? Couple of quick notes about games with simultaneous moves. So first of all, when you have simultaneous move games, so that means that they're both doing the same thing at the same time, right? Player 2's strategies must be the same regardless of player 1's first moves. So you notice how here, both of these nodes, the options are the same. It's either heads or tails for player 2, right? So that has to be the case, because if we're going to say that player 1 doesn't know what player 2 is doing, or player 2 doesn't know what player 1 is doing, right? If we had a setup where, say for this particular one, right, that instead of being set up this way, say that your two options here where you could choose heads and you could choose tails, and if you chose heads, then I would either choose up and down, but if you choose tails, then I would also choose heads or tails, right? So this would be player 1's move, and then these guys would be player 2's moves, right? So there are two options. So the issue with this would be player 2 is not supposed to know what player 1 is doing, but based on what your outcomes are, right, what your choice is to make, you could figure out what player 1 had done, right? So like, if I just tell you to pick heads or tails in this game, you don't know what the other person did, because those are your options no matter what. But here, if I tell you, oh, pick heads or tails, well, then you know that player 1 must have chosen tails, because if they hadn't, then you'd be picking up or down. Okay, so that's thing number 1, is player 2's strategies must be the same regardless of what player 1's move is. And also, order is irrelevant. If you're moving simultaneously, you could rewrite this with player 2 going first and then player 1, and it won't make a difference. All right, last one here. So this one, multiple game trees can be used to represent the same game matrix. Trees can be structured to highlight different strategies, and in general, these are just more useful than matrices. So let's look at this guy. This is another up-down. Here we're starting with player 1 making a choice, and then player 2 makes a choice. So let's map this to our table over here. So if player 1 chooses up and player 2 chooses left, player 1's choosing up, player 2 is choosing left, that's 3-1. If player 1 chooses up and player 2 chooses right, up, right, that would be here. Okay, if player 1 chooses down and player 2 chooses left, here's down and left, so that's 2-2. And if player 1 chooses down, player 2 chooses right, here's this guy, 2-2 as well. Okay, so the thing that I want to point out to this is that if you look at this payoff matrix and this one up here, they are exactly the same, right? Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can get this all into the camera at the same time. All right, so you'll notice these two matrices are exactly the same, okay? But our game trees are very, very different. So you can have different game trees set up in different ways that still represent the same payoff matrix, and it just kind of lets you highlight different things. Okay, like this one, this was a very clear payoff matrix for this one. There was no need to have two branches off here to show what player 2 was going to do, because they didn't really have a choice, right? Whereas down in this one here, it makes a little bit more sense to have it broken off to show the left and the right for both of them. So there's just different ways of setting up different game matrices to represent different things, okay? So this is just an introduction to game trees and what they look like, and how you kind of read them. Next, we're going to be looking at, okay, what are these useful for and what would you do with them?